controls, maybe you can mute most of us.
Yeah, I'm getting used to this too, everyone, as a so bear with me there as well.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Jeff Tucker. I think I know most of you. Chairman of the Highway Transportation Committee. We have another committee chair, Ross Corthell, as chair of the Rail Committee. So welcome, Ross. We'd like to have a meeting today. We're going to touch on some of the things that we're seeing in Washington. Karen Booth is going to be taking us through that. Karen Booth is attorney at Thompson Hine. So Jennifer, if you hover on Thomas, could you go on mute? And if he isn't listening to us at the moment, Jennifer, you can actually, I believe, put him on mute.
I can mute him.
Okay. I'm not sure if it's him or not, but
I think it might be.
Okay.
I think it was Avery, and he's now muted. So.
Okay. All right. So we're going to start with Karen, our general counsel. We're going to talk hear from Randy as well, because there's been tremendous amount of work over the last 3 weeks in Washington. Trade associations, NITL as our trade association representing us. We have members on the call right now that NITL is representing, trying to get acknowledged as essential. So the work that we're doing is really being showcased right now as a trade association. We wanted to get this call together for us to kind of see where are we today, what have we been through, where are we, and then what can we be asking of the league to do to help us in the next coming days and weeks. What do you need to see from us, from the league? So I'll turn it over to Karen, and Karen, you can feel free to introduce yourself again and get started.
Thank you, Jeff. So good afternoon, everybody. I guess possibly good morning if you're on the West Coast. But you know, there has obviously been a lot of activity in Washington with the focus on COVID-19. You know, given the pandemic and the crisis, it's pushing other activities that we've been working on more to the back burner. They're still there. Agencies are, you know, up and running and working on these issues, but obviously the focus now has been on COVID-19 for the most part. And so what I was planning to do was just kind of cover some of the government agency actions that have taken place relative to COVID-19.
Yeah.
I'm getting some feedback there, Jennifer and Jeff.
Sorry, just everyone, if you are not speaking, please mute your computer or your phone. I'm trying to figure out who this is right now so I can but please
there we go.
Mute yourselves if you're not talking. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds better. And so as I started to say, you know, my plan is just to spend, you know, high level 10-15 minutes just kind of touching on what the federal agencies have been doing relative to COVID-19 and transportation, and then turn it over to Randy and Jeff. And some of this, you know, you're probably familiar with, but in case you're not, I mean, I think, you know, starting bigger picture here, DHS came out with guidance basically on March 23rd as to what it has identified as essential and critical infrastructure workers. And, you know, this was critical as everybody was trying to figure out, as different states were going to possibly be taking different actions, you know, what did the federal believe was critical in terms of infrastructure and workers? And what they did is they put out guidance. And I think that's really important for everyone to understand. It's non-binding, but it's kind of overarching guidance that the federal government put out relative to these issues that then states could look at and follow, but certainly not follow necessarily in exactly the same manner. So, you know, it's intended to sort of guide states and local and industry partners on these issues. And, you know, I think the key thing for all of us and the important point is that transportation is very much considered essential by DHS, and I think, you know, across all the states that have come out with their own guidelines. And the trucking industry is a big part of this. We're all seeing this on the news, you know, where our world is kind of front and center with just how truly critical the trucking industry is to our supply chains, to all of our daily lives. And I think that's just been front and center, as we all see with some of our store shelves perhaps being empty with some of the actions that everyday folks are taking as they work through this difficult time. But these drivers are on the front line and they're clearly essential. DHS has updated this to make sure that truck stops and rest stops are now included under this definition that they've put out. And I would also say that in general, this has been pretty broadly defined. So it's not just the transportation service, the over-the-road activity, but a lot of supporting activities fall under what's considered critical, whether it be distribution and warehousing, you know, obviously brokers, and Jeff can speak to that, intermediaries, middlemen, you know, producers of packaging, et cetera. So transportation clearly on the front lines of what is critical, and highway being out in front. And with respect to that, FMCSA under DOT has also been taking some very important measures directly related to providing, you know, relief, regulatory relief to facilitate these emergency deliveries. And so first on March 13th and then again on March 18th, FMCSA came out with orders to basically loosen its enforcement of hours of service. And it did so not for everybody, but for those drivers, those commercial drivers who are directly involved in these emergency efforts. And I'm not going to walk through every category that FMCSA has defined, but it is important for everyone to know that there are some limits to who can benefit from this relief and some restrictions. Now, this alleviation of hours of service is supposed to expire on April 12th. I'm pretty convinced that's going to be expanded given where we are today, and perhaps Jeff and Randy have insight on that, but I would fully expect that relief to be expanded. The other action that FMCSA has taken is it has essentially issued waivers where it is going to allow commercial driver licenses and learner's permits and certain medical certificates that need to be renewed to be extended. And that, of course, is because, frankly, some of these licensing agencies have closed during this pandemic. Medical examiners may not be available to update the driver's medical conditions. And so FMCSA has put this relief in place until June 30th. Again, there are some restrictions and limitations here. I'm not going to walk through those. If people have questions, I can answer those. But, you know, we are seeing our federal government here at work trying to do what it can to facilitate these relief efforts with respect to trucking. The next issue I want to touch on is, you know, more of an intermodal one, and it relates to the Federal Maritime Commission, who just put out an order a couple days ago with it trying to get out in front in what it sees as a high risk of port congestion issues. And so the FMC has put out an order where it now plans to open a new fact-finding investigation and really take a commercial approach in trying to get out in front of this risk of supply chain disruption and congestion. So it has decided to engage industry stakeholders across the maritime sector, including trucking, to just start talking about what folks are seeing, what they're forecasting. We're already starting to see problems with space at the ports, which obviously frustrates the ability to return empty containers as well as pick up cargo. Lots of uncertainties around where imports are headed, although they seem to be headed down clearly for now, but yet people are still trying to predict where that capacity influx may occur, where it may peak again, and what's that going to mean for everybody. So the FMC is going to be creating supply chain innovation teams to talk to industry leaders across the sectors and try to come up with industry solutions so that we don't get into some of these crises, not only for supply chain disruption, but with demurrage and detention, which we've seen happen in the past. And then just lastly, related to that, the league has been very active in trying, and frankly, advocating for change at the FMC to deal with unreasonable demurrage and detention practices. That's been years in the making, and we've gotten it to an interpretive rule that's very close to coming out of the FMC in terms of a finalization of that. And we're hearing that they're trying to speed that up and get that out in just the next few weeks. So stay tuned for that. We'll certainly update you and let you know when that happens and exactly what is in that interpretive rule. I'm not going to go through all the detail of that, but happy to answer questions. So with that, Jeff, I thought I would turn this back over to you and Randy, although the one other issue that I would like to address at some point in this meeting is the AB5 California law, where that stands in the courts, and the potential for the league to participate in support of the trucking industry in hoping to get a final preemption order.
All right, Karen, I think you have a few minutes. If now, maybe it would be, unless you want some time. Do you need some time? Do you want to maybe go through the?
I can cover that now. If you'd like to cover that now.
If you think maybe it requires discussion and potentially motion, then maybe we can hold off, because
I don't think we'll need a motion, Jeff. I think that we'd be okay for you and Jennifer and Randy and folks to make a decision. Maybe the EC needs to be involved because there'll be a financial commitment. But just really quick, and again, for questions at the end, we can get into this. Some of you may be aware that California passed a law known as AB5. They did that in September. It was to take effect January 1, but the law essentially applied to all industries, including the trucking industry, in determining who's an independent contractor and who's an employee. And it's essentially, they've adopted what's known as an ABC test. I won't walk through all those prongs, but I can assure you that applying this test to the trucking industry basically means that independent owner operators cannot qualify as independent contractors under this law in California. Thus, they would have to be employees of the trucking companies. Now, there are some exceptions in the law. I'm not going to get into that, but typically, these independent owner operators do not qualify under those exceptions. So a legal challenge was brought at the end of last year by the California Trucking Associations, given that if this law was allowed to take effect, it would completely disrupt the trucking business model as we know it today. And they were successful in getting a preliminary injunction, arguing that this law is preempted under federal law because federal law says that states cannot regulate trucking rates, routes, or services. And by getting this injunction, it means this law cannot be enforced. However, the state of California and the Teamsters have appealed, and it's now pending in the Ninth Circuit, and the trucking industry has reached out to the league and others about possibly filing a brief in the Ninth Circuit to help educate the justices about just how damaging this law would be, not only to truckers, but obviously to their customers and to supply chains and to interstate commerce. Because you can imagine if you had one structure of a business model in the state of California that prevented independent owner operators from essentially doing what they do today, but forcing trucking companies to hire these drivers as employees, we know that just wouldn't happen across the board. We know that some companies would frankly just stop serving the state of California. We know that others who decided to stay, their cost structure would go up, their capital investments would go up. And then, of course, this all trickles down to you all. And so it is a really important issue. And this is being looked at right now. The league is hopefully thinking about and may join other groups in filing a brief in the Ninth Circuit in support of the trucking industry and in support of preemption, which would prevent this law from being enforced. One last point on that, I think many people feel that if California were to be successful in getting this to go through, in essentially getting the lower court injunction overturned, that other states would follow suit. And so we've heard about New Jersey, we've heard about possibly Massachusetts, kind of adopting their own models that would require employee drivers only. And again, you can see how difficult that would be for the free flow of commerce across the country. So with that, Jeff, let me turn it back to you. And if folks have questions at the end, I can answer those.
Thanks, Karen. And I think it's very important. I think it's very relevant and something that the league needs to be part of. And I recognize, you know, the financial responsibility here is a great one as well. And I think we can share that financial responsibility across a wide range of folks. I want to give you guys a different perspective that we're just starting to kind of see. There's a study out, I think it just came out yesterday, by a think tank that provides some of the sort of like the transportation ecosystem analysis of where are the bottlenecks. And it's not necessarily for infrastructure, but it's where the bottlenecks in getting critical supplies to places they need to go. The data that was mentioned in this report was FreightWave sonar data that indicated that Puget Sound, which is where the first COVID case was found in the U.S. and is still quite a hotspot after New York in the U.S., has a higher functioning freight transportation network right now based upon the tender rejections, right, and the freight movements than compared to San Francisco. And you know, I can't help but wonder if, and what we're seeing today, we do quite a bit of freight in the Northeast and around the country, but right now with our customers switching gears and trying to feed and send medicines to New York, we're big in food, medicine, and oil and gas. Wildly different, but what we're seeing in our conversations with carriers is we're starting to see carriers who are looking out for the good of their drivers and their employees and saying, hey, we're not sending people into the trouble areas to the extent that we can control that. But we're seeing the drivers who drive for them are wanting to go, or individual owner operators or smaller fleets are wanting to go out of a sense of duty. So it's something that's just, you know, when you see that San Francisco, that's got it now under better control and less of a hot spot than Puget Sound, and you also kind of are seeing bits and pieces of that on the front lines for serving New York. It's something I think that the authorities have to be keeping in mind. So we touched on that yesterday in prepping for the call, but I'm beginning to see some data to support, you know. But that's hopefully we go through this again in 100 years, and this isn't on our radar screen, these kind of crises, but just another consideration when we've got this richness. And right now, I can tell you right now, 4 weeks ago, we had the largest number of trucking companies in business ever, the largest number of drivers ever. Give or take 3 or 4 months, you know, the numbers have been fluctuating the last 4 months or so prior to the COVID. But we've got essentially, inarguably, we have the richest, most diverse transportation network this country's ever had, and lots of different niches. And I think it's critically important that we protect it to the extent that we can. And the league, as we know, has always stood for free and safe trade and free flow of goods, because it's so critical to the economy in this country. So thank you, Karen. I'm glad that you brought that up now, and I'll come down off my horse and we'll turn it over to Randy to tell us. Randy is our government affairs exec and spends time very close to Capitol Hill, but always on the phone with our important contacts there, since there's not a heck of a lot of in-person meetings today. Randy, would you give us?
Sure. Sure. Thanks, Jeff. You're exactly right. There are no in-person meetings going on right now, but there are a lot of phone meetings. Phone meetings are usually shorter. So I actually think that there's a lot of work getting done, and a lot of people are getting to talk to folks that they normally wouldn't get to talk to. So if there's some water we need to carry for anybody on the phone, just let me know. Before I go into the what have we been doing up on the Hill list, and when I do get into that, it's in no particular order. It's mostly generated just to let you know what we're involved in, who's been reaching out to us about what does the league think on X, Y, and Z, but more importantly, to spurn your and stir your thoughts about what we should be doing for the league in DC as these as the virus issues go forward, and as government's trying to wrestle with what does a solution to that look like. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was AB5 a little bit. This has been to this point a California state issue, but there's been some so we're playing blocker on Capitol Hill about AB5 type legislation at the federal level right now. And believe it or not, it has taken a turn into independent contractors and non-employees are actually spreading COVID-19 because they need to come to work, they don't have paid sick leave, they can't afford to take off, and they don't have anybody above them saying, don't come to work. So this getting everybody to be an employee has been a dream of most folks in labor unions. It's a dream now of Uber drivers and folks like that want to organize and be employees. And it's been a long-term goal of many pro-labor Democrats. So we do need to watch out for this in a lot of ways. If it doesn't get blocked at the state level, it becomes more likely that the feds will take it up. And so it really, really is an important issue. But right now we're playing blocker up on Capitol Hill, and we're not alone in that space, as you can imagine. There's a lot of groups that are also trying to push back on this. But when government passes these huge bailout packages, it's real easy to slip stuff in there among the thousands of pages that people have to pay attention to. So let's talk a little bit about what we've been doing up on Capitol Hill in the virtual world. So first off, I want to give you a little bit of idea about capacity issues. As you know, NITL is active members of a couple of groups that are pushing for both heavier weight and twin 33-foot trailers in the LTL space. So we're part of a group that sent letters to the White House and the congressional leadership asking that they consider including those in any kind of pandemic relief bills that go out because it can, without any government expense, really enhance the transportation system as far as capacity. Well, we received communication back from the White House and the folks in the Economic Development Office there, and they wanted to know more. They then said, we're going to hook you up with the people that are running this for us over at Federal Highways. And then several of us had a virtual meeting with Federal Highways to make our case. No indication of where that is right now, but it's a really, really good sign that the White House and people high up in the administration are now paying attention to capacity issues, they will make a huge, huge difference as we go into recovery. So I'll leave that at that. The FMCSA, Karen told you, has put several notices up of exemptions and exempted cargo when they're moving to alleviate an emergency. Just so you all know, if you're shipping, I'm just going to make stuff up, food products, and they're not going in an emergency situation to relieve human suffering and danger, that particular load can't move under these exemptions. But the next load, which may be going to alleviate a shortage someplace, it could move under those exemptions. So just be careful that the driver that's handling a shipment for you knows that this is an emergency shipment, so you can convey that to any law enforcement and protect him when he is, if he is stopped for an hours of service violation. On the other hand, don't put people into the danger zone by telling them something is an emergency or qualifies under the emergency rules when it's really not. We've had direct conversations with FMCSA. We, in particular, are trying to get pet food added to the exempt list. We were successful in getting them to say that mixed loads going to groceries and things could include pet food and still move under the emergency orders. We have not been successful in getting pet food itself listed in the exemption, but the acting administrator, Jim Mullen at FMCSA, called me directly to discuss the matter. And so if any of you have issues you want brought before them, we do have a direct pipeline to staff over there and senior staff. So next thing I wanted to chat about was we're in contact with the committee staffs of both the Republicans and the Democrats on the committees of jurisdiction for T&I. So the next transportation bill, what's that going to look like? So there's talk now about a fourth package, a fourth disaster package, a COVID-19 package that would be infrastructure focused. There's been a lot of pushback on that from various people up on the Hill. So I'm not sure we're going to get that, but we're in close contact with people saying, if you do this, here's what we and our members would like to make sure is included in the discussion. I'm involved in biweekly calls with DHS and their Critical Infrastructure and Security Administration, which is where the original list of critical items has come from. And they continue to massage and think about that. They also are giving us good data on what's happening at the federal level, who's in charge of different aspects of disaster relief and how that's going on. And through that, we're a member of the chamber. I'm a member of the chamber supply chain working group. And through that group, we're working directly with a lot of other trade associations to make sure everybody is singing the same song as we're making these requests. A couple other things we're doing are participating in calls that have to do with ports or rail service. All those eventually end up affecting truck and overall service. So we're staying plugged into that. We're monitoring hazmat issues, whether it be rail or truck, through the interested parties group that we're part of. And one of the successes that group just had this week kind of tags on to something Karen said earlier, was FMCSA has also now exempted renewal of the hazmat endorsement if they're expired. So if somebody's hazmat endorsement is expired right now, they can continue to haul hazardous materials through the transportation system. We've been really aggressive in advocating for harmony across the states and coordinating with the Fed's list of exempted commodities and what amounts to critical infrastructure. And to give you, this is a personal anecdotal story, but I want to give you a little bit about how crazy this is. All hair salons and barbershops, as you know, have been declared non-critical, at least in Virginia, so they're not open. But I got a call from my dog groomer today saying, was I still bringing my dog in next week to get groomed? Because they're part of the pet industry and they are considered critical. So weird things going on. And it's really hard to keep track of this. We're going to have a lot more of those types of examples, but it's really important for us to just be conveying the needs and concerns and these kind of anecdotal issues that our members are having. So we'll want you to continue to keep those in front of us. And I think on a more serious note, an issue that many of you were aware of are some states that were closing their rest stops and things for trucks. And we were among the strongest voices of people pushing back on that through connections with the state trucking associations, local chambers, local members of NITL, and we're able to get that, at least in Pennsylvania, reversed. We just need to stay on top of that. These guys are finding ways to get food. In fact, a lot of people are giving free food for truckers and things like that. But if you don't open the bathrooms, it becomes a problem. And I think then next thing I want to talk about is what's next for the government. I told you that they've got a fourth package that is getting a lot of play up on Capitol Hill. A lot of people are talking about infrastructure. We in the transportation world think of infrastructure as roads and bridges, ports, rail yards, that sort of thing. This new package is looking more like an infrastructure package that would help water systems, schools, rural internet, broadband, power grids, all those sorts of things. And especially if it includes infrastructure real broadly like that, we need to pay real close attention to what it includes that we don't like. And I don't mean a building project or broadband. I mean a policy like everybody has to be an employee that works in this field, or that if you take advantage of this money, you have to have union labor, those sorts of things. So we just need to be careful about that. The last thing I've heard is that while this fourth package is appealing to a lot of people, the administration and a lot of Republican leadership want to give the initial package a couple months to see what it does. We don't have any of the small business loans out yet. We don't have any of the direct payments to people out yet. We don't have any of the Payroll Protection Act. I mean, that just became live today. We could just start applying for it today. So it's going to be a month or two before we start seeing, did any of these other things make a difference? So they're reluctant to just keep piling on until they know what's going to happen. Now, that having been said, what that means is any package we get is not going to be rushed through as quickly as the last couple were. It will be much more thoughtful, much more focused on recovery rather than immediate needs. And then something I just heard this week, and I've heard it several times, that kind of leads into that, is that it looks like the committees of jurisdiction are thinking about how do you take the existing highway bill, plus that up a little bit, and that means add some extra funding to it, but just extend it for a year. So no new policies, just add some extra dollars that would go through formula to the states for building roads and bridges. And quite honestly, a lot of their constituents for T&I are builders, sand and gravel folks, states themselves, and they all love this idea of no new policy but new money or additional money. So we need to watch that closely and make sure that we are getting what we need for a decent recovery other than just building stuff. Because as you all know, to build anything in the federal highway system is potentially decades out. And then what I'll leave you with is that original thought of what do you need us to be doing? What's going on in your businesses? What are you hearing that is right or wrong with what the government's doing? And how can you give us some ammunition that we can carry forward and influence that a bit? So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jennifer, Jeff, and go from there. Thanks.
Thank you, Randy. Folks, just order of business here. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, if you're on a video conference, you can see that we're recording this. We are recording this. We're going to be sending this out to members who would like to listen and or see it. So in the event that you have a question that you don't want to be asked by yourself or by your voice, please feel free to email Jennifer, Jennifer Hedrick, or email me. Jennifer, your email address real quick.
It's jhedrick, HEDRICK, @NITL.org.
And mine is fairly easy, jeff.tucker@tuckerco.com. And we won't name you, but we'll ask your question. Couple things real quick. I want to circle back very briefly. Karen, we were talking the other day about contracts. The one thing, we don't hear too much force majeure in this world, but I know that DHL made the worldwide headlines when it earlier this week or end of last week declared force majeure in all of its contracts. I'm wondering if from your vantage point, are you seeing that, and is there anything elsewhere? And clearly their air freight, and especially international air freight, a lot of what they do outside their warehouses. Are you seeing any of that? Is there anything that we need to be thinking about as league members?
Yeah. So Jeff, we're not seeing a lot of that in our practice, but I'm going to say, yet. I think overall, we've seen folks being able to work through issues, that there's a lot of commercial relationships that, people are using to try to address, the pain points that they have. But having said that, a lot of times, a lot of companies are in triage mode, and every day their management teams are, on the phone trying to figure out, with the virus spreading, of course, it's an evolving kind of problem for people. And I really think they're focused more on triage, on fluidity, on their supply chain, and less right now about legal battles. And so it's possible that some of these contractual questions and legal issues are going to be more on the back end of this pandemic than they are right now, unless, somebody like a DHL, has to be able to do that to get around their service guarantees. We've seen FedEx also say, and UPS, they can't meet those guarantees anymore. And most people, I think, are being flexible and understanding. Having said that, I think it's wise, if you're in a situation, and I'm going to put this in the transportation context, if you have minimum volume commitments that you can't meet, if there's potential risk for liquidated damages, start when you can, having somebody in your legal office at least look at that and get a sense of that. If you're being damaged, document that, document your costs and your damages along the way. It's a little bit easier. And then you can sort of figure out if you have a contractual problem, either that you need to enforce or you need to get out of. It kind of depends, where you are and which hat you're wearing in that chain. So, we're not seeing a lot of it yet, but I think it's wise to keep that on the back burner. And if you're having problems, have somebody, kind of start looking at that for you.
Thanks, Karen. Just had to come off of mute. Couple quick comments. Randy's at work and all of our trade associations and our connection with all the different trade associations. I've been fortunate to be able to see and kind of struggle with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is my neighbor state. I'm outside of Philadelphia, but in New Jersey. New Jersey's its own kettle of fish. But the issue that we're dealing with, I think, is one of we do need harmony. We need solid communication. I think that the administration's been. My perspective is that the administration's been slow to assert or at least seek to assert more communication and more pressure. I would love to see Pennsylvania's governor pressured by the Secretary of Transportation to the extent that she can to keep those restrooms open, declare them critical to the supply chain, and risk losing highway funds. That's the kind of alignment and harmony, and that's harmony with a 2x4, but it's the kind of harmony that we need right now. I can just give you some anecdotal, this is directly from us and our experience, and to give you an example of why we need this harmony. We've got our team, our operations team, are working with our carriers on a daily basis all week long, and I've been gathering these stories from our team. We're getting multiple carriers have indicated they need permission to serve New York City and the greater New York area. That's totally false, totally false. Some shippers and or receiving locations are asking drivers if they've been to New York City in the last 14 days, and if so, they're not allowed on their property. It took after there were two different announcements around quote unquote quarantines for that tri-state area: New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. New York City, Connecticut, New Jersey. One of them was a rumor that the government, that the president started saying he's considering a quarantine of that area. Prior to that, though, there was the recommendation, I believe, by the administration and CDC that anyone who has visited New York City in a certain period of time should self-quarantine for 2 weeks. It took 2 days after that announcement for CDC to come out and say, "Oh, hey, we weren't referring to essential personnel." You can't unring that bell. And I can tell you that our team is continuing to unring that bell on a daily basis. So this is the kind of quote unquote harmony that we need, I think. We also, some of the things that we're seeing, and I'm curious, I'm anxious to open this up, but I'll just rattle them off. Canadian carriers are increasingly unwilling to come to the US for fear of contagion, for fear of not being able to get back to Canada. We got quite a bit of southbound freight right now that we're trying to cover, and we are covering it successfully, but every conversation is a challenge. And then the closure of the rest stops. One of the things that bubble up, and one of our members, Sandra, mentioned it to us. You know, the biggest problem is drivers are telling them is we can't find food. We're hearing that. Can't find food, we can't find a place to park. A lot of our carriers are finding themselves ticketed or cited for parking when they can't find parking because the parking facilities have been shut down. And we know, even going into this thing, parking has been a problem. So we really are, I am incredibly grateful for the work that, you know, the league has done, Randy does for us, and then the collaboration, and Jennifer, of course, and the collaboration between the different organizations in Washington. The way they came together is just remarkable. And I know that, like, at least in the first week or so of this crisis, most of my time was spending, okay, well, all right, Pennsylvania did this, New York did this, and trying to figure out, okay, what does it all mean? And the governors have different definitions for essential and or critical. Our Washington representatives and the league should be proud, and our members should be proud, got out ahead of this and really got everyone together and have a direct pipeline to policymakers. So huge difference, at least with regard to understanding policy and direction. So thank you, Randy. Thank you, the league. And folks, if there was ever a time to remember how important the league is to you, now is the time. So with that said, I want to open this up. To our members, and just remember, you can take yourself off of mute. If you're on the phone and you're not seeing the video screen, we'll need you. I'm not sure how we're going to do that, but maybe if those of you who can take yourself off of mute, what you do is you just bring your cursor to your block, and you click in the upper right-hand corner. There's 3 dots on a white and a blue box, and you can take yourself off of mute.
And there's also the chat function. We have a couple of comments. Avery, Nikki, thank you for those. And if you're more comfortable using that chat function, certainly feel free.
Okay. So yeah, thank you. I see the two questions. I'll ask one of them. Roll call is reporting that Pelosi is saying the next COVID package, I guess phase 4, will not include infrastructure. Pelosi punts on infrastructure in next coronavirus aid package on rollcall.com. I mean, is that too early to tell, Randy, or is she digging in early at this stage?
Well, I think that they're probably trying to keep from looking like they're making such a rich package that it can't pass. And when as you heard me say earlier, they were talking about plussing up the existing T&I bill and just doing a year extension. If they can do that and get it out of the way, that means that a fourth package will, number one, it'll be a whole lot smaller and maybe more palatable. But number two, it will focus on all these things that aren't roads and bridges and airports and ports. So that makes good sense to me. Politically, it's an easy way for them to not be victimized by the president. And I'm not saying that as a political commentary, but I'm saying that if they try to plus up an infrastructure bill and he says, I just want to build stuff and get America back to work, and not plus, if they tried to Christmas tree it with all kinds of different labor policies and abortion, whatever, the president will eat them alive on every night's newscast. So I think she's trying to avoid that. So I think it's a really smart move. It'd be good for us and our members to basically just have more money dedicated to infrastructure. It's a missed opportunity for us, though, because they're not going to make any policy changes. We won't see anything like increased size and weight. We won't see any federal changes to legislatively to hours of service or anything that makes any of this permanent. So again, I don't think that that's wrong. And roll call normally doesn't put things out that they're not pretty sure about.
Okay. I wanted to, we've got 10 minutes, and at least for me, it's got to be sharp 10 minutes. I have a customer call at 2 Eastern. I want to ask, is there anything, Randy mentioned, that we have some very specific member specific questions that we are trying to resolve in Washington. Are there any members right now on the call who need some sort of support out of Washington from a regulatory relief standpoint, an interpretation standpoint, anything we can do to help? All right, I'm seeing a lot of mutes and hearing nothing. I'll ask you folks. You got a sense for what the league is doing. I know that these are very challenging times, and we some of us need more time to get our heads around what's changing and what is going to change. And I'll just remind you that the league is here. We're here for you. Jennifer has sent out a link recently that shows great places to go to get a lot of your answers. So the Chamber's got a great link that puts together sort of the 50 states view of what is happening. That's been very important to keep up with, and it's updated as live can be. I'll just ask you folks to think of the league and send us your feedback. If you want to call in a week or 2 or 3, please let us know. Please let Jennifer and or me as well know that you want the call and what you want on the call. But we wanted to just sort of get together, circle the wagons, and talk and find out what you guys need to hear more about. There's one other question or comment on the group chat that Arkansas is starting to give permits to food trucks so that truckers can be able to get food. and it's a great idea. Maybe we should spread the idea to other states in efforts to help. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a great idea. A friend of mine manages a country club nearby, and clearly they're shut down. I know not all golf courses are shut down if you can keep the 6-foot kind of perimeter, but what they asked is they have a lot of food in the fridge, and they've got a huge parking lot, and they said, hey, is there something we can do to offer food and or parking, temporarily? So I think a lot of people are interested in doing something, and so if you have ideas like that, we're happy to engage. There is one thing I'd like to. I've been talking a lot with Kathy Fulton, and she's, I know, a good league friend of ours, and someone that a lot of us know. Kathy's with the Allen Aid network, and in that same vein, I just like to remind our members about Allen very quickly here as we wrap. The American Logistics Aid Network, or ALAN, delivers information, services, and expertise to ensure those affected by crisis have the nourishment, hydration, and medical care they need. So they're kind of a conduit for people who want to donate and people who need. Almost like a quasi, I think of them, I'm sure I'm not doing this justice, but I think of them as sort of like a quasi Red Cross outfit. But they work with nonprofits to understand their needs, find businesses who can donate services, and every dollar a humanitarian organization saves on delivering supplies can be redirected to delivering their mission. So just to ask you to look up alanaid.org, ALANAID.org. And that's one way. I think when I'm a member of my local Rotary Rotary Club, and when you're, two people can do a whole lot more. And when you can funnel those resources into a larger organization, you're able to do quite a bit more. And since we're all in logistics and Allen is squarely in our field, that might be a great place if we've got extra food on hand, if we've got parking, if we've got whatever it is that you want to try to. I know a lot of folks are making masks. I was helping one of a guy I don't even know that well, but I know him through a trade association, try to find sources for ethanol a couple weeks ago. It's like you just don't know. Everyone is going to find some point in time where we're so well connected in this logistics industry that we know somebody that does something. So just ask you to keep your ears open, your eyes open, and think of Allen Aid and as you're doing that. Any last thoughts, questions, comments by anyone on the line?
Jeff, I'd just like to give kind of a quick plug for the resources you've already mentioned. There is a COVID-19 resource page on nitleague.org. You can find that in the resources section. And as Jeff mentioned, if you have questions, if you have resources, you have questions for Randy, questions for Karen, questions for me, you have everybody's email address. If not, certainly I'll follow up with an email after this call so everybody has that information. But please be in touch. We want to help in whatever way we can, and so please remember those resources that are available to you. And also we're on LinkedIn and Twitter, and we want to continue to build that network as well. There's a lot of good information sharing happening online, as you all know, and so please look us up on both of those locations. So thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks, Jennifer, Randy, and Karen, for all your hard work on behalf of the league and the members. And we will adjourn this meeting. Thanks, everybody, for your attendance, and good luck. Stay healthy, stay well, stay safe.
Okay.
See you next time.
Thanks.